Pasamos a considerar ahora
We will now
el proyecto
move on to draft
L19,
resolution L19,
situación de los derechos humanos en
situation
Etiopía.
of human rights in Ethiopia.
Para la introducción del proyecto le doy la palabra al embajador de la
To the
República
ambassador of
Checa
the
en
Czech
nombre de la
Republic
Unión
to
Europea.
introduce this on
Tiene la
behalf
palabra,
of the EU.
embajador.
You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, I have the honor to present on behalf of the European Union draft resolution L19 entitled Situation of Human Rights in Ethiopia. Almost 2 years into the conflict, the situation in northern Ethiopia remains alarming. Fighting resumed on the 24th of August, ending a 5-month truce. Our first priority should therefore be an immediate cessation of hostilities, direct talks in view of reaching a permanent ceasefire and a political solution to the conflict, and full humanitarian access to all conflict-affected areas. We welcome yesterday's announcement by the chairperson of the African Union Commission that the EU-AU-led peace talks are due to start soon in South Africa. This is of the utmost urgency, given that with every day that goes by, there are more victims and there is more trauma. Meanwhile, much to our concern, we continue to receive reports of grave human rights violations and abuses, such as large-scale willful killings of civilians because of their ethnicity and widespread sexual and gender-based violence. The conclusions of the report by the International Commission of Human Rights experts on Ethiopia are very much in line with those of the Joint Investigative Team. There are reasonable grounds to believe that war crimes and crimes against humanity have been and continue to be committed. The EU is appalled by the gravity and scale of the human rights violations and abuses. We furthermore fear that this is the only tip of the iceberg. Tigray has been cut off from the outside world for months now. There is no telecommunication, no internet, and no electricity. UN presence is very limited, and there are hardly any visits from journalists or independent actors. The risk is very high that we have not yet seen the full scale of what is happening. Mr. President, Excellencies, the EU is firmly committed to the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity and unity of Ethiopia. We fully support the ongoing mediation efforts led by African Union. A stable, prosperous and peaceful Ethiopia is important for the entire Horn of Africa. As we have emphasized in the past, the Commission has been established to complement the work undertaken by the Joint Investigative Team and by domestic accountability mechanisms. Its work is not yet finalized. We therefore call upon all Member States of the Council to renew the mandate of the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia and vote yes on this resolution. I thank you.
Gracias, embajador. Le doy la palabra a la delegación de China para presentar una enmienda oral. La delegación de China tiene la palabra.
Mr. President, on behalf of co-sponsor countries and China, we would like to present an oral amendment to the draft resolution L19. The content has been informed to the Secretariat in advance. The peace and stability of Ethiopia is of great significance to the lasting peace of the region. The international community, on the basis of fully respecting the will of the country concerned, should support all parties seeking a lasting effective domestic solution. Draft resolution L19 is seriously imbalanced. The sponsor countries selectively ignored the Ethiopian government's efforts and progress in the promotion and protection of human rights. Disregards the country's strong objection, forces the extension of the mandate of the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia and intervenes into Ethiopia's internal affairs. Of course, we thank the sponsor countries' positive engagement with all parties on the text. Meanwhile, we regret that our legitimate recommendations are not taken on board. Hence, we feel compelled to propose the oral amendment as follows. We request to delete from the OP9 of the draft resolution the expression decides to renew the mandate of International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia for a further period of 1 year. I repeat. We request to delete from the OP9 of the draft resolution the expression decides to renew the mandate of International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia for a further period of 1 year. Forcing to establish a country-specific mechanism without the consent of the country concerned is not conducive to constructive dialogue and cooperation and cannot help truly address the issue. Extending this mechanism is not necessary and will add complex elements to Ethiopia's development and the easing of the regional situation. It should be pointed out that proposing this amendment doesn't mean China supports the draft resolution L19. China requests the Council to put this amendment to a vote and calls upon all members to vote in favor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Consulto a la delegación de la República Checa acerca de la enmienda oral presentada por China, que informo ya fue publicada en la extranet. Embajador de la República Checa.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the European Union, I wish to inform the Council that the main sponsors do not support this amendment and call for a vote. I urge all members of the Council to vote against the amendment. Thank you.
Gracias. También informo que hay 3 copatrocinadores adicionales para el proyecto L19. Pasamos ahora a comentarios generales. La República Checa tiene la palabra.
Mr. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the EU member states that are members of the Council. This general comment has been agreed by the EU as a whole. We deeply regret that the delegation of China has resorted to tabling an oral amendment that serves no purpose other than to render the resolution meaningless by deleting the paragraph that renews the mandate of the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia. To take delegations by surprise with no possibility to seek instructions or to allow for further consultations is not a constructive way of working. It leads to unnecessary polarization and has a pernicious effect on the integrity and the credibility of the Council. The Council should not reward this kind of aggressive behavior. Draft resolution L19, entitled Situation on Human Rights in Ethiopia, merits adoption as it stands. It is the product of a thorough, open and transparent negotiation process. The International Commission has a key role to play in ensuring that ongoing and future efforts to deliver accountability and realizing transitional justice are successful. Its mandate must be renewed. As mentioned before, we have only seen the tip of the iceberg. The reports that have been received for now barely scratch the surface. Mr. President, while we welcome the announcement that peace talks are due to start soon, we cannot turn our heads away from massive human rights violations and abuses that take place in northern Ethiopia on a daily basis. They need to be brought to light. Reconciliation is supposed to be built on justice. The Commission is the only existing international mechanism that is mapping what is happening in northern Ethiopia, including with regard to the role played by Eritrea. The members of this Council must take their responsibility. For those reasons, the European Union will vote no on the amendment and calls on others to do the same. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Tiene la palabra la delegación de Japón. Perdón, de la France. Ambasador, vous avez la parole. Perdón,
I do apologize.
La delegación de Japón, si puede, gracias, embajador de Francia.
I'd like to thank the French
La
ambassador.
delegación de
The
Japón, si
delegation
puede
of
comenzar,
Japan
por
can
favor.
go
De
first.
vuelta. Gracias.
Please start again with the microphone on. Thank you.
Gracias, señor presidente. Japan is deeply concerned about the escalation of violence in northern Ethiopia and the deteriorating human rights and the humanitarian situation in the country. Japan urges all the parties to the conflict to remain from the direct attacks against the civilians and end any measures that may worsen the already acute humanitarian crisis. We call for immediate and effective humanitarian access in the affected areas of Ethiopia. Japan appreciates the measures undertaken by the government of Ethiopia based on the recommendations included in the report by OHCHR and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. Japan calls upon all parties to the conflict to fully cooperate with the commissions of human rights experts to conduct through and impartial investigation into allegations of violation and abuses of international human rights law and the violation of international humanitarian law and international refugee law in Ethiopia. Japan is committed to supporting the unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ethiopia and will continue to respond to the humanitarian crisis together with the rest of the international community toward achieving the peace and stability in Ethiopia. So Japan considers that the resolution must be adopted as original version. Gracias.
Gracias, embajador. Tiene la palabra
Thank you,
Eritrea.
Ambassador.
Perdón,
I give the
la
floor to
France.
Eritrea. I beg your pardon, to France.
Perdón, perdón. No tomé mi café,
I didn't
embajador.
have my cup of coffee.
Je donne la parole à l'ambassadeur de
I
la
give the floor to the
France,
ambassador
s'il
of
vous plaît.
France.
Gracias, Presidentes. Trabajo duro
President.
para usted,
It's hard work, isn't it?
pero entendemos perfectamente.
But we fully understand.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank
Monsieur le
you,
Président, la
President.
France s'associe aux commentaires généraux de
President,
la
France
République
aligns
tchèque au
itself
nom
with
de
the
l'Union
general statement
européenne.
made by the Czech
Elle
Republic
souhaite
on behalf of the
insister sur
EU,
le
and we would
caractère
like to
particulièrement
emphasize
alarmant
the
de la
particularly
situation en
alarming
Éthiopie depuis
nature
la
of the
reprise des
situation in
hostilités dans le
Ethiopia
nord
since
du
hostility
pays
resumed in the
depuis
north of the
maintenant un peu
country
plus d'un mois.
for more than a
Les
month
cas de
now.
violations des droits de l'homme,
The
conséquence directe du
cases of human rights
conflit,
violations, which
s'accumulent
are a
jour après
direct
jour.
consequence of the
Nous sommes avec
conflict,
cas
are accumulating
particuliers
day after day.
de rapports
In
faisant état du
particular, there are
recours systématisé au
reports
viol,
of the
aux
systematic
violences
use of
sexistes,
rape and
à
sexist
l'assassinat civil
violence
en raison de leur
and
appartenance
the killings of
ethnique,
civilians due
des
to their
crimes qui pourraient constituer des crimes de guerre
ethnicity,
et des crimes
and
contre
these are
l'humanité.
actions which could be crimes
La
against
France est d'autant
humanity
plus
or war
inquiète que la
crimes.
région du
France
Tigré
is all
est
the more
isolée et
alarmed that the
marginalisée.
Tigray is
Ses
remote
habitants
and
n'ont dans leur grande
marginalized,
majorité même
and
plus accès aux
its
services de
inhabitants,
base
to a large
tels
extent,
que
do
l'eau,
not have access to
l'électricité ou
basic
encore les soins
services such as
médicaux,
water,
ni
electricity,
aux
or even medical
télécommunications.
services, nor do they have access to
Outre la situation
telecommunications.
humanitaire
Over and
catastrophique
beyond the disastrous
que nous
humanitarian
essayons de
situation, which we
contribuer
are
à
trying to
soulager,
help
cela nous fait
address,
craindre que la situation dépeinte
we
par la
are
Commission
afraid
ne
that the
reflète qu'une
situation
partie du désastre.
reflected by the
La France
Commission
appelle au
is only
cessez-le-feu
part of the
et à
picture.
l'instauration immédiate
France
d'un
calls
accès
for
sûr et sans
ceasefire
entrave de
and
l'aide
for
humanitaire au Tigré.
immediate and
L'annonce
unhindered
toute
access
récente
for
par le
humanitarian
gouvernement
aid to
éthiopien
Tigray.
et le gouvernement
The recent
régional du
announcement
Tigré
by the
de
Ethiopian
leur
government and the
volonté de
regional government of
reprendre le chemin des
Tigray
pourparlers de
that they
paix
are
sous
willing
l'égide de
to
l'Union
resume
africaine
negotiations under the
nous
aegis
donne
of the
de
African Union
l'espoir.
gives us hope in this respect.
Monsieur le Président, dans ce contexte, le
President, in
renouvellement
this
du mandat de la
context, the
Commission
renewal
internationale
of the
d'experts des droits de
mandate
l'homme
of
sur
the
l'Éthiopie
International
est
Commission of
capital
Experts on Human
et
Rights
le
in
Conseil
Ethiopia is
doit rester
essential,
saisi de
and
cette
the
question.
Council
La
must
Commission
remain seized of
permet
this
depuis un
issue.
an déjà
For more than
d'enquêter
a
sur
year
les
now,
violations des droits
that
de l'homme
body
depuis le début
has
du
helped
conflit et
investigate
de les
human rights
documenter.
violations
Elle
that have occurred
participe
since the
ainsi
start of the
activement à
conflict
la
and
lutte
to
contre
document them. It
l'impunité.
thus contributes to the
Elle
fight
formule
against
également des
impunity and
recommandations
also makes
qui aident à
recommendations
trouver une
which
solution
help
négociée
provide
et
a
durable au
negotiated and
conflit.
lasting solution
La
to the
France est
conflict.
confiante
France
dans le
is
fait que la commission
confident
d'experts
that the
doit continuer à fournir un complément
committee of
utile
experts
au travail
will
conjoint
continue to
réalisé
provide
par le Haut
a useful
Commissariat
addition to the
et la
work done
Commission
by the Office
éthiopienne
of
des
the High
droits de
Commission
l'homme.
and the Ethiopian
Elle
Human
exprime le
Rights
vœu que le
Commission.
gouvernement
We
éthiopien
hope that the Ethiopian
continue
government
à
will
travailler avec cette
continue to
commission
work
comme
with
il l'a
this
fait ces derniers mois.
committee as it
Elle
has
exprime le
done
vœu
over the last
que
few
l'amendement
months.
présenté par la
France
Chine
hopes that the
ne soit
amendment
pas
presented
adopté,
by China
d'autant plus que
will be
cet amendement,
rejected,
présenté
all the
de
more
façon
so because
inopinée,
this
n'a pu faire
amendment,
l'objet
which was
ni de
presented in
réflexion
untimely
ni de
fashion,
discussion.
was not
La France appelle tous les
discussed
membres à
or
renouveler le
even
mandat de la
reflected
commission
on as a
d'experts
consequence.
en votant
We
favorablement sur cette
call for everyone to
résolution.
renew the
Je vous
mandate of the committee
remercie.
of experts, and we will vote in favour of this resolution. Thank
Merci.
you.
Tiene la
Thank you.
palabra
I
ahora
give the
sí,
floor
Eritrea.
now to Eritrea.
Thank you, Mr. President. Eritrea would like to reiterate its principled position that states shoulder the primary responsibility to safeguard human rights and to addressing challenges. In the history of this Council, there is no single instance that has been corrected through such a politicized mandate, and this time is not an exception. The dire security and human rights challenges that we witness today in Ethiopia are the consequence of unprovoked and premeditated war unleashed by the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Regrettably, the present resolution largely ignores the heinous crimes committed by TPLF, in which has become a familiar pattern to whitewash the crimes of the TPLF while shifting the blame to its primary victims to advance ulterior political agenda. The report that the resolution echoes today is based and suffers from the several procedural and substantive flaws and is at variance with the facts on the ground. The resolution also seeks to assert a renewed presence of Eritrean troops in Tigray and calls on Eritrea to withdraw them. This is simply untenable and peddled for a political purpose to implicate Eritrea and embolden the TPLF clique. For the above reasons, Eritrea will support the oral amendment by China and vote against the draft resolution as a whole, and calls upon all fellow members to do the same. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. United States, you have the floor. Ambassador.
President Biden said to world leaders at the UN General Assembly, "We support an African Union-led peace process to end the fight in Ethiopia and restore security for all its people." The United States commends the African Union's readiness to launch a robust mediation effort. We welcome recent statements by the federal government of Ethiopia and the Tigray regional authorities on their readiness to meet. As part of that process, we strongly urge an immediate cessation of hostilities, a return to the negotiation table, and sustained, unhindered humanitarian assistance. We call on the African Union to integrate human rights accountability into the peace negotiations it will lead on northern Ethiopia. We are committed to the unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ethiopia. We all agree that achieving peace and stability in Ethiopia is our shared goal. The United States calls on all actors to end violations, abuses, and hostilities without preconditions to enable space for a peaceful resolution. The continued fighting in northern Ethiopia escalates an already high risk of further human rights violations and abuses. We also urge the government of Ethiopia and all other actors to renew and follow through on the commitment to a comprehensive, inclusive, and transparent transitional justice process. Any solution to this crisis must involve justice and accountability for atrocities and human rights violations and abuses. The adoption of this resolution, including the renewal of the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia and the release of the Commission's deeply troubling September 19th report, are steps in the right direction. The United States strongly supports this resolution, which reflects the Council's commitment to work with the government of Ethiopia to promote respect for the human rights and human dignity of all Ethiopians. We commend the government of Ethiopia's support and facilitation of the 2021 joint investigation into the human rights situation in Tigray. We ask the government to extend the same cooperation to the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia to ensure the Commission has unhindered, safe, sustained, and timely access, can be independent, effective, and transparent in discharging its mandate, and can accurately report to this Council on the human rights situation in northern Ethiopia. As such, we vigorously reject the amendment that they would eliminate the mandate that the Commission received from this very Council. They are just getting started, having been established less than a year ago. The proposed mandate is in bad faith, raised at the last moment, and is deeply, deeply misguided. We thank member states for their support of this important resolution as it is written. Thank you.
Thank you. Tiene la palabra Alemania. Embajadora.
Germany, please. Later, Mr. President.
Later. Okay. India tiene la palabra.
India, please.
You have the floor.
Mr. President, the international community had been consistently calling for cessation of violence, exercise of restraint, dialogue, and building trust towards resolving the outstanding issues. It is in this direction that the African Union had invested considerably since the appointment of High Representative Obasanjo in August 2021. While there had been some forward movement with the Ethiopian government's ceasefire declaration on 24th March this year, which was followed closely by a roadmap for peace talks, the fighting that broke out subsequently on 24th August is deeply concerning. We welcome the Ethiopian government's commitment to the peace talks. We have also noted the declaration on 11 September by the regional government of Tigray, agreeing to an AU-led peace process. We hope this commitment will hold. We also hope that an amicable political solution will be found in a manner that serves the interests of all Ethiopians in keeping with the provisions of the Constitution of Ethiopia. Mr. President, we are concerned with the looting of fuel from the warehouses of the World Food Programme on 24th August, which was meant for humanitarian purposes. Women, children, and the elderly have been particularly vulnerable and continue to suffer. In coordination with the government of Ethiopia, humanitarian assistance to northern Ethiopia must continue uninterrupted. It is critical that the international community continues to support the government of Ethiopia and extends assistance towards rebuilding northern Ethiopia. It is equally important that measures are taken to ensure that Ethiopians are able to return to their sources of livelihood. We underline that the founding principles of humanitarian assistance, that is humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence, should always guide any humanitarian action. These should not be politicized. We continue to call upon all stakeholders to exercise restraint and work together to build trust and confidence that could pave way for dialogue. The initiatives of the African Union and the region must have this Council's strong support. In conclusion, India reiterates its strong commitment to the unity, sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Ethiopia. I thank you.
Thank you. Tiene la palabra Namibia.
I recognize Namibia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have made it clear on previous occasions that the work of this Council and its mechanisms on the situation of human rights in Ethiopia should be complementary and not undermine national and regional efforts to address the human rights situation in that country. Resolution S33/1, which established the International Commission of Human Rights of Experts on Ethiopia, mandated it to build upon the joint investigation already conducted by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. The report of the human rights experts presented during this session makes it clear that their work is no longer complementary. The proponents of draft resolution EL19 further open our eyes on the real intention behind this mechanism by replacing the words building upon, which were contained in the original resolution, with furthering the work of the joint investigation in the current draft resolution. My delegation also takes issue with the press release of the Commission of Human Rights Experts, dated 7 September 2022, which welcomes rather than taking note of the decision of the Security Council on the situation in Ethiopia. Issues of international peace and security are not part of the mandate of the Commission of Human Rights Experts. For these reasons, Namibia cannot support EL19, titled Situation of Human Rights in Ethiopia. We will vote in favor of the oral amendment and call on all members of the Council to do the same. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Entiendo que no hay más solicitudes para comentarios, por lo tanto le doy la palabra al país concernido. Tiene la palabra el distinguido representante de Etiopía. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ethiopia categorically rejects Resolution L19. It is fitting to recall what Ethiopia has been doing to ensure accountability and gauge whether this resolution was warranted. The Ministry of Justice dispatched teams of prosecutors to localities where serious human rights violations are alleged. The Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, on its own initiative, undertook and published independent investigations and allegations of human rights violations. the government facilitated a joint independent investigation by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. This council welcomed reports of their joint investigation. The government of Ethiopia accepted to implement the recommendations of this joint investigation and established an interministerial task force which just issued the report of its first phase investigation. The task force is making much broader work of ensuring accountability and make sure victims receive immediate livelihood and psychological social support. To undertake this significant work, the task force cooperates with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, UN agencies in Ethiopia, and other partners. Currently, the task force is also finalizing a draft of the National Plan for Transitional Justice. This will be discussed with stakeholders and serve for sustained accountability work, healing, and reconciliation in the country. Individuals accused of violations of human rights have been brought before a court of law. Some are convicted, some are acquitted with full respect for due process. The EU and its supporters know this and other engagements of the government. They know that the government declared a humanitarian truce and expedite humanitarian aid. They also know that the TPLF blatantly violated the humanitarian truce and reignited the conflict. Still, they prepared a draft resolution asking for the extension of the mandate of the Commission even before the report was released. This is a report replete with politically motivated, unsubstantiated allegations. The report failed to meet the UN standard of proof for such investigations. Despite our misgivings, we tried to accommodate the Commission and allow it to undertake on-the-ground investigation in the hope that it will contribute to our effort of accountability. It refused to listen to reason and insisted on undertaking investigation all over the country and unnecessarily repeating the joint investigations work. It presented to the Council an irresponsible substandard report. It made public ultra-virus statement included in its report calling for action by the UN Security Council showing its political direction. The resolution seeks to pile pressure on Ethiopia for an additional year at every session of the Council while the government undertakes all these measures of accountability. This is unacceptable. Finally, Mr. President, the African Union now invited the parties to peace talks, which the government of Ethiopia has accepted to participate in without precondition. The focus of Ethiopia's partners should have been supporting such efforts and our genuine national efforts of accountability consistent with the principles of complementarity. We therefore ask members of the Council to reject and vote no against this draft resolution and support Ethiopia's peace, accountability, and progress efforts. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Me informa la Secretaría que no
Secretariat
hay
tells me that
PBIs
there are no
implicados en
PBIs
esta resolución.
in this resolution.
Perdón, que sobre el PBI
Sorry,
de esta
on
resolución
the
debo darle la
PBIs for
palabra al
this
señor
resolution, I
Abdul
need to give the floor to
Fofana,
Mr. Abdul
que nos
Fofana.
va a informar al respecto.
He will give us some information.
Thank you, Mr. President. The President amendment to this resolution, HRC51 L19, on operative paragraph 9, if adopted, would reduce the total resources required for this PBI, for which the revised resource requirements will be communicated later. These reduced requirements for the implementation of this draft resolution, if adopted, would be reflected in the next annual report of the Secretary General on the revised estimates resulting from resolutions and decisions adopted by the Human Rights Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Consulto si hay
I'd
delegaciones
just
que
like to
deseen
ask
hacer
if any
explicación de
delegations
voto
wish to
antes
give an
de la
explanation
votación.
of vote before the vote.
Reino Unido.
United Kingdom, please.
Kingdom, you have the floor, Ambassador.
The UK strongly opposes this oral amendment brought so late in the day by China, and let me, like others here in this hall, Mr. President, be absolutely clear about the intent and the effect of this draft amendment were it to be carried. This amendment, which seeks to remove the mandate of the International Commission of Human Rights Experts in Ethiopia, strikes at the very heart of the draft resolution before us. Removing this paragraph would mean the end of the Commission, and an end to the vital investigative work that it does. It's vital, in our view, Mr. President, that this Council rejects this amendment, even as we look forward with hope to the upcoming peace talks led by the African Union. It's clear that any solution to the crisis in Ethiopia must include justice and accountability for the atrocities committed during this conflict by all parties. Atrocities which include human rights violations and abuses, violations of international humanitarian law, which could amount to war crimes or crimes against humanity. The need for full, impartial, independent, and transparent investigations into the entire conflict in Ethiopia is therefore just as important now, today, as it was when this Council decided to establish this Commission less than a year ago. The Commission's work has effectively just begun. It must be given the time and resources it needs to advance its vital work, to advance accountability in Ethiopia, and its mandate must therefore be renewed by this Council. Mr. President, we will therefore vote against this oral amendment brought forward by China, and let me encourage our fellow members of this Council to do so as well. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Je donne la parole à Luxembourg. Ambassadeur.
I give the floor to Luxembourg.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you,
Le
Mr.
Luxembourg
President.
regrette la présentation d'un amendement oral à la dernière minute par la délégation de la Chine sur la résolution L19 concernant la situation des droits de l'homme en Éthiopie. Depuis novembre 2020, la région du Tigré est le théâtre d'un conflit meurtrier doublé d'une très vaste crise humanitaire. Le dernier rapport de la Commission internationale d'experts des droits de l'homme sur l'Éthiopie a corroboré à quel point ce conflit expose les populations civiles aux pires violations et abus des droits humains et à des souffrances d'une gravité épouvantable. L'amendement oral qui vient d'être présenté de manière inopinée aurait comme résultat de supprimer le mandat de la commission d'experts indépendants qui est actuellement l'outil principal pour informer ce Conseil de manière impartiale sur la situation en Éthiopie. Ceci reviendrait à ignorer l'une des pires crises humanitaires sur la planète. Le Conseil laisserait à leur sort les populations civiles qui souffrent le plus et c'est intolérable. En tant que membre de ce Conseil, il est de notre responsabilité collective d'assurer le Conseil que le Conseil remplit son rôle de répondre à des situations des droits humains graves, à des violations de droits humains graves qui se détériorent et qui exigent des réponses urgentes. L'amendement oral devant nous dépouille le Conseil de ce rôle. Nous encourageons très fortement les autorités éthiopiennes et érythréennes ainsi que tout autre belligérant à mettre fin immédiatement aux hostilités et à coopérer pleinement avec les mécanismes des Nations Unies, qu'ils soient humanitaires ou en matière de droits humains. Compte tenu de ce qui précède, ma délégation votera non à cet amendement et on appelle à toutes les autres délégations à en faire de même. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Tiene la palabra Alemania.
I give the floor to Germany.
Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. President. Germany regrets the presentation of the oral amendment by China at this very late stage of the process, literally in the last minute. There was plenty of opportunity to discuss L19 on the human rights situation in Ethiopia during several informals. The conflict in Ethiopia has been ongoing for 2 years, and the report from the Commission of International Experts gives reasonable grounds to believe that crimes and crimes against humanity have been committed and continue to be committed. Mr. President, members of this Council, the amendment proposed aims at ending the mandate of the Commission of International Experts. Ending the mandate would mean to ignore one of the most dire humanitarian situations on the planet. Do we really want this. We have no interest in singling out parties to the conflict or of undermining domestic efforts. We urge all parties to end hostilities immediately. The Commission of International Experts is currently the only impartial source of information for this Council concerning the human rights situation in Ethiopia. And it is our duty to renew their mandate and listen to them. We thus will vote against the amendment and call upon all members of this Council to vote against the amendment too. Thank you.
Thank you. No hay más solicitudes.
There are no further requests.
Por lo tanto,
Therefore,
con relación a la enmienda oral presentada por China, en función del voto solicitado por la delegación de la República Checa, vamos a tomar acción sobre esta enmienda oral. Pido a la Secretaría que abra el dispositivo de votación y que las delegaciones voten sobre la enmienda oral presentada por China, por favor. Consulto si todas las delegaciones han puesto su voto y si es correcto. Por favor, la Secretaría que cierre el dispositivo de votación. La enmienda tiene 18 votos positivos, 21 votos en contra, 8 votos en abstención. Por lo tanto, la enmienda oral presentada queda rechazada por el Consejo. Ahora pasamos a tomar acción sobre el proyecto de resolución L19. Situación de los derechos humanos en Etiopía. Consulto si hay delegaciones. Sí, la delegación de Somalia tiene la palabra.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a member of the Human Rights Council, Somalia has an obligation to promote the principle of solidarity and cooperation towards the promotion and protection of human rights. We also believe that human rights are integral to the promotion of peace and security, economic prosperity, and social equity. However, Somalia is highly concerned about the politicization of the activities of this August Council. This report presented by the IHRA, International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia, is a clear testimony on that. Mandates established without the agreement of the concerned country lack credibility, and it undermines the accountability and redress measures taken by the Ethiopian government. International mechanisms should be complementary to national efforts, but not act as replacement because they bound to weaken the national institutions. Mr. President, it's unfortunate that the European Union presented once again this draft resolution, which not only does not have the consent of the country concerned, but also goes beyond the mandate of this Council. In addition, this resolution will neither contribute to the peace process nor to the protection and promotion of human rights on the ground. Mr. President, now it's time to terminate this unnecessary mandate established on Ethiopia in order to create a better opportunity to advance Ethiopia's effort and cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Against this background, my delegation is not in a position to support this resolution and calls for a vote on this draft resolution L16. Somalia will vote against it, and I invite all other members of the Council to do the same. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Consulto si hay alguna otra delegación.
Would
La
any other
delegación de
delegation
Argentina tiene
like
la
to take the
palabra.
floor? The delegation of Argentina, please.
Brasil.
Muchas gracias,
Thank you
señor
very much,
presidente.
President.
La República
The
Argentina
Republic of
ha decidido,
Argentina
como en años
has
anteriores,
decided, as in previous
mantener el
years,
voto a favor del
to
proyecto
vote
de
in
resolución
favor
del
of the
Consejo de
draft
Derechos Humanos
resolution
sobre la situación de
on
derechos
the
humanos en
situation of human
Etiopía.
rights in Ethiopia.
Asimismo, entiende que la tarea
It
del grupo de
understands that the
trabajo
task of
interministerial
the
establecido
interministerial
por el
working
gobierno
group
etíope
established by the
para
Ethiopian
avanzar en
government
medidas de
is
reparación
tasked
y
to make
rendición de
headway
cuentas
in
permitirá avanzar en la dirección
accountability, and that this
señalada
will help
y nota
move
con
in the
satisfacción
right
los primeros
direction. And we
pasos
note
del
with
gobierno de
satisfaction the
Etiopía
first steps
para
taken by the
implementar las
government of Ethiopia
recomendaciones
to implement the
contenidas en el informe
recommendations
conjunto del
contained
Alto
in the joint
Comisionado
report
y la
of the
Comisión de Derechos Humanos de
OHCHR
Etiopía.
and the International
Muchas
Commission
gracias.
on Human Rights. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Tiene
I thank
palabra la
you.
delegación do
I give
Brasil.
the floor to the
Embaixador.
delegation of Brazil, please.
Muito lhe agradeço, Sr. Presidente. Mr. President, Brazil is deeply concerned about the resurgence of the conflict in Ethiopia, which has led to the deterioration of the human rights and humanitarian situation in the country. We are deeply troubled by reports of widespread abuses and violations and call on all parties to fully respect international human rights and humanitarian law and to take all necessary measures for the protection of civilians without discrimination. We appreciate that the resolution before us has maintained a balanced and constructive approach in recognition of the responsibility of all parties. We strongly support its calls for an immediate ceasefire, as well as its focus on accountability, technical assistance, and national reconciliation and healing. We also appreciate that the resolution recognizes the willingness of the government of Ethiopia to meet with the Commission on Human Rights experts and to discuss possible modalities for future cooperation. While for Brazil, the continuation of hostilities and the deterioration of the conditions justify the involvement of the Human Rights Council, it is also important to give due consideration to the concerns recently expressed by the government of Ethiopia. It is our belief that the Commission of Experts has overstepped its mandate, particularly in its statement issued on the 7th of September. We recall that the Commission's tasks, as determined in the Resolution S33/1, are to conduct a thorough and impartial investigation, to establish the facts and circumstances, to provide guidance on transitional justice, to integrate a gender perspective and a survivor-centered approach, and to engage with all relevant stakeholders. In our view, the Commission does not have a prerogative to call upon UN bodies, especially the UN Security Council, to take action under the Charter regarding the conflict. This is the role of Member States, based on open and inclusive consultations with all concerned actors, international and regional organizations. We reiterate our support in this regard to the efforts undertaken by the African Union, especially through the work of the High Representative of the Horn of Africa, Olusegun Obasanjo. In light of the above, Brazil will maintain its vote in favor of the draft resolution on the situation of human rights in Ethiopia, on the understanding that the Commission will strictly abide by its mandate in accordance with Resolution S33/1. In particular, we call on the Commission to engage actively with all relevant stakeholders in performing its functions, most notably with the government of Ethiopia and the African Union. We will continue to monitor closely the work of the Commission with a view to advancing a sustainable solution for the conflict. I thank you.
Obrigado. Tiene la palabra la delegación de Venezuela.
Gracias, presidente. Venezuela expresa su firme oposición al proyecto de resolución N19 sobre la situación de los derechos humanos en Etiopía. Resulta lamentable la falta de disposición de sus patrocinadores por entablar un diálogo franco con el país concernido y que, por el contrario, hayan optado por la vía de la coacción con la imposición de esta iniciativa politizada, con la cual pretenden renovar el mandato de la Comisión Internacional de Expertos en Derechos Humanos sobre Etiopía, que no cuenta con el apoyo del país concernido y que previsiblemente estará destinada también al fracaso. Etiopía ha dejado muy claro su oposición a este proyecto de resolución que socava los esfuerzos conjuntos adelantados por la Comisión de Derechos Humanos de Etiopía y la Oficina del Alto Comisionado, además que entorpecerá y obstaculizará el alcance de resultados concretos. Además de las diversas medidas tomadas y de los esfuerzos por abordar los desafíos por el conflicto que se vive en la región norte del país, Etiopía ha reiterado el compromiso de implementar las recomendaciones contenidas en el informe de la investigación conjunta de la Comisión de Derechos Humanos de Etiopía y la Oficina del Alto Comisionado. Etiopía ha demostrado plena disposición para seguir cooperando con este Consejo y sus mecanismos y su determinación de dar cumplimiento a sus compromisos nacionales e internacionales en materia de derechos humanos, por lo que la presentación de esta iniciativa no tiene ningún sentido. Este proyecto de resolución patentiza la práctica selectiva y políticamente motivada que hemos visto a lo largo de esta toma de acción. Varios de los países de la Unión Europea promotores han cometido y siguen cometiendo desmanes y violaciones en derechos humanos sin que se les promueva iniciativas similares, lo que pone en evidencia una politización, selectividad y doble estándar que rechazamos. Por ello votaremos en contra del proyecto de resolución y esperamos que el resto del Consejo haga de forma similar. Gracias.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra China.
Mr. President, we have always maintained that the work of the Human Rights Council should be guided by the principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity. We maintain that countries should conduct constructive dialogue and cooperation in the field of human rights, and we are opposed to politicization of human rights issues. We are opposed to the setting up of country mechanism without consent of country concerned. Resolution L19 is a product of politicization, is a typical example of exerting pressure on developing countries. China urges parties concerned to respect the paths of human rights development chosen by Ethiopia independently in light of its own domestic conditions. We are opposed to interference in the internal affairs of Ethiopia by certain countries in the name of human rights or humanitarian needs. In view of the foregoing, we will vote against L19. We call on other member states to do the same. Thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias.
Thank you.
No veo más solicitudes, por lo tanto, a solicitud de la delegación de Somalia, vamos a tomar acción sobre el proyecto L19, situación de los derechos humanos en Etiopía. Solicito a la Secretaría que abra el dispositivo de votación, por favor, y las delegaciones que expresen su voto. Consulto si todas las delegaciones han expresado su voto. Si es así, que la Secretaría cierre, por favor, el dispositivo de votación. El resultado de la votación del proyecto L19, situación de los derechos humanos en Etiopía, es 21 votos a favor, 19 votos en contra, 7 votos en abstención. Por lo tanto, el proyecto L19, situación de los derechos humanos en Etiopía, queda adoptado por este Consejo.